Every town has a fixture. In Millridge, it wasn't a statue or a flagpole. It was Hal Mercer's corner booth at the diner. The bell above the door at Maple and Pine gave a soft ring as Hal stepped inside, his frame slightly hunched, his step measured but steady. The air was sweet with maple syrup and warm eggs thickened by steam rising from the kitchen and the hiss of the griddle. He didn't need to glance around. The corner booth by the window was always free at 6:42 a.m. Darlene spotted him before he spoke. "Morning sugar," she said, already reaching for the black coffee pot. Hal offered a short nod, the edge of a smile brushing his face as he slid into the booth, placed a small, leather-bound notebook beside the salt shaker, and folded his coat just enough to slide in patch and all. The jacket, faded and frayed, looked like it had stories stitched into every seam. He unfolded the Millridge Weekly Tribune, shook it once, and laid it across the table like a ritual. No one asked where Hal came from. They just knew he came every morning, same jacket, same silence. His presence had a rhythm like the jukebox cycling back to Sinatra at the exact same time each Monday. He always ordered the buttermilk pancakes, no butter, 2 slices of crisp bacon, and he always left a folded $3 bill under the saucer before the plate even arrived. At 6:47, Brandon Hale pushed open the door with a gust of cold air and the clatter of a folder jammed with printouts. The bell above him rang sharper, less inviting. Hey, big week ahead, people," he called out, breezing past 2 retirees nursing omelets. Darlene gave him a nod, half smile, not pausing as she topped off Mr. Kessler's coffee. Brandon made a beeline for the counter, dropping his folder with a thump. "Need a triple shot today, Darlene. You wouldn't believe how behind we are on these Veterans Day logistics." She raised a brow. "How behind are you on manners, sweetheart?" Brandon chuckled, turning to scan the room. His eyes landed on Hal. "Still got the throne, I see," he muttered loud enough to travel. "Must be nice to have a permanent table." Darlene didn't respond right away. She carried Hal's breakfast across the room and set it down with practiced care. "That man once pulled my son Norman off Miller Street when a car jumped the curb. Broke his own wrist catching him. Never said a word about it. Just paid his tab and went home." Brandon blinked, caught mid-laugh. "Huh. Didn't know that." "Lot of things you don't know, baby," she said, and returned to the counter. Brandon wandered over to Hal's booth, arms crossed, folder pressed to his chest. Hal didn't look up from his paper. Brandon tilted his head, eyes narrowing at the jacket. "That thing belonged to a donation bin?" he asked, mock casual. The patch, a triangle, faded to a ghostly blue, barely visible under the fold. "Looks like it's seen too many winters." Hal calmly turned a page. His silver watch ticked softly, echoing under the Sinatra tune. Brandon chuckled again, this time with a smugness he didn't bother to hide. "Better hope it doesn't fall apart before the parade." Darlene, now by the coffee machine, froze. Her eyes lifted not to Brandon, but to Hal. The paper in his hands stilled, but he said nothing. The silence was heavier than the joke. Brandon shifted, unsure, then tapped the table twice. "Anyway, big week. I'll leave you to your rituals." He turned and headed for the door folder swinging against his hip. The bell gave its usual ring, softer this time, as the door eased shut behind him. The morning sun broke through the diner's fogged windows, warming the laminate and catching on the brass napkin holders. As it slid across the booth, the light hit Hal's jacket patch just right enough for it to catch someone's attention. Hal never missed a Monday at Mosswood Park, and the benches never needed asking who cleaned them. By 6:03 a.m., the mist still hung low along the tree line, pooling in hollows between the bronze statues and the winding gravel path. The park was silent, save for the quiet rasp of Hal Mercer's gloved hand brushing dead leaves off the curved wooden back of bench 7, one of the few not yet replaced by molded plastic. He carried a canvas tote filled with folded cloths, a battered thermos, and a small American flag, still stiff from its packaging. He moved slowly, knees aching, as he knelt before the weathered plaque of Lieutenant Thomas Callahan. With a clean handkerchief, he wiped the thin film of dew from the bronze, polished the name, and carefully pushed the flower vase upright. One of the marigolds had fallen during the weekend wind. Hal replaced it with quiet care and adjusted the miniature flag beside it so it stood straight and centered. Behind him, the gravel crunched. Sir, this area's off-limits until the city team finishes layout." Brandon Hale's voice carried sharply through the morning fog, clipboard clutched like a badge. Hal turned his head, slowly rising, with the measured patience of someone who'd lived through far louder orders. He didn't speak. Instead, he offered a small nod and gestured to the vase. Brandon stepped forward, scanning the area. "We're taping zones for the Veterans Program chairs folding stage speakers. Legal says no non-credentialed volunteers until setup is signed off. Liability, you understand." Hal didn't answer. He reached into his tote and pulled out a small wooden sign handwritten with careful blocky strokes, "Remember them right." He stuck it gently into the soft ground beside the walkway. Brandon squinted. "Did you make that?" A woman's voice called from behind the hedges. "He makes one every year." Tina Alvarez, wrapped in a green field jacket 2 sizes too big, stepped out from between the trees, work gloves tucked in one back pocket. "And I leave it right where he puts it. Every time." Brandon hesitated. It's non-standard." Tina tilted her head. "He's been here longer than your permit." Brandon flushed, shifting his clipboard. "Still, if it's not city-issued." She walked past him and picked up a loose trash bag beside the bin. "So, issue it." Brandon turned to Hal again, but the older man had already moved on now, kneeling beside another plaque. This one read, "Sergeant Diane M. Loring, 1960 to 1989. He gently brushed pine needles from the engraved letters. His jacket pulled tight as he leaned forward, revealing the patch again, triangular, faded the stitching, nearly worn smooth. From a nearby bench, Mr. Ogden raised a shaky hand in salute. He sat bundled under 2 scarves, coffee in a lidded paper cup, watching Hal with the steady reverence of a morning ritual. "That man's been doing this since before my oldest was born," Tina said under her breath. "Never asked for a thank you." Brandon crossed his arms. "Still wearing that jacket, huh?" His voice rose a bit louder, meant to be heard. Tina narrowed her eyes but said nothing. "It's just an old jacket," Brandon added with a half snort, scribbling something on his clipboard. Hal paused mid-wipe. He turned, slightly glanced down at the frayed edge of the patch, and pulled the collar higher with a slow, smooth motion. Then he stood, nodded to Mr. Ogden, and walked toward the edge of the park without a word. Brandon bent to retrieve the handmade sign. He held it in his hand, staring at the uneven letters before shaking his head. Tina stepped beside him. "You really don't know, do you?" Brandon shrugged. "Know what?" The chairs creaked. The brass band played low, and everyone stood, except the man the general walked toward. The breeze cut through Mosswood Park like a quiet blade, ruffling the rows of paper flags the middle schoolers had planted along the pathways. Folding chairs shifted beneath anxious feet. The choir fidgeted in matching navy cardigans, and the scent of freshly raked leaves mixed with the tang of metal and old wood. The honor guard stood at attention, polished shoes aligned like compass points. Rifles held upright in silence. It was Thursday, November 9th, and Milridge was observing Veterans Day the only way it knew how small, earnest, and 1 degree shy of coordinated Brandon Hale stood at the podium, one hand clamped on the microphone stand, the other flipping note cards with increasing speed. His tan sport coat was too light for the cold and too new to trust. He'd already dropped his place once just after mispronouncing Lieutenant Jubinski as Lieutenant Dizbinski. And now he said, trying to reset the rhythm, "Please join me in welcoming our guest of honor, retired General Elaine Torrance, decorated veteran of the 101st Airborne and recipient of the Silver Star, Bronze Star, and Legion of Merit." Applause rose politely from the crowd, veterans and spouses, school teachers, city staff, a few curious teens with hoodies half-zipped under their jackets. The general emerged from the side path, flanked by two local ROTC cadets. She walked with calm authority, her coat heavy with insignia, silver hair pulled back in a single braid, eyes scanning the crowd, like a woman used to assessing the wind before the jump. She ascended the platform steps, nodded once to Brandon, and paused. Mid-step, her gaze locked. Something on the far right bench near the oak tree. Hal Mercer sat with his hands resting atop a cane he hadn't used the day before. His coat was zipped halfway the triangle patch, just barely visible beneath his folded arms. His head was bowed slightly, his cap low, not out of disrespect, but something quieter, something older. The general didn't speak. She stepped off the riser. The crowd, unsure, stilled. The band trailed off. The air tightened. She walked slowly across the grass. Her boots left no sound. The only noise was the breeze teasing the mic cable and the flag above them flapping once, then stilling. She stopped before Hal. Straightened. Brought her right hand to her brow in a crisp, precise salute, the kind that needed no stage to give it weight. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman clutched her husband's sleeve. A teacher dropped her program. One child no older than 8 pointed and said, "That's Mr. Hal." Brandon froze. His mouth opened, then shut again. The note cards slipped from his hand like leaves. The general held her salute longer than protocol demanded. Then she lowered it and spoke, voice steady but not loud. "That patch," she said, "was only given to 5 men. He's the last one standing." Silence spread in a widening ring. A boy in the front row leaned toward his friend and whispered, "That's the guy from the diner." Hal didn't shift. For a moment he seemed carved from the same bronze as the statues nearby. Then he nodded once, stood slowly, and returned the salute, just as a single trumpet began taps. The booth was empty for the first time in years, but the jacket was there, folded neatly beside a coffee receipt and a name, Hal Mercer. Brandon stepped into maple and pine with a hesitance he hadn't worn the day before. The bell chimed with its usual ring, but the diner was quieter now, as though the building itself had paused to listen. Outside, the sky sagged with gray, and the sidewalk still held the shine of morning drizzle. Inside, the windows fogged gently at the corners, though no one seemed in a hurry to wipe them clean. He didn't scan the room like usual. His eyes landed instantly on the corner booth, Hal's booth. The seat cushion was unpressed. The napkin dispenser sat undisturbed, but folded atop the table where a plate of pancakes usually rested was Hal's jacket. The patch was exposed for once, not buried in folds or shadows. Next to it lay a diner receipt, blank, except for a printed timestamp, and in looping cursive the name Hal Mercer. Brandon approached slowly, setting his messenger bag on the edge of the opposite bench. He sat down like a man unsure of how to occupy a sacred space. His eyes flicked over the jacket, creased at the elbows, threadbare at the cuffs. Beside the receipt, tucked just under the hem, was a napkin folded twice. He lifted it. Written in the same ink, just 5 words. "Some honors don't come with ceremony." He exhaled and leaned back, arms crossed, jacket still untouched. Darlene appeared with 2 mugs, one already half full. She set one in front of him. "Didn't think I'd see you here before 9, she said gently. He didn't look up. "Did he say anything before he left it?" "Just asked for your usual table." She paused. "Didn't say much. But then again, he never did." Brandon nodded faintly. "How long have you known?" She pulled up a chair from an empty table and sat. "I don't know what I knew, just enough. Enough to trust the quiet." He looked over, brow creased. "You once said he helped your son," Darlene nodded, eyes softening. "Norman was 6, running across Miller Street. A car came out of nowhere. Hal moved so fast, caught him mid-step, broke his wrist. Didn't tell anyone. Wouldn't let me call an ambulance. Just smiled and said, 'It's just a sprain.'" Brandon's fingers traced the edge of the folded napkin. "And you never told anyone?" She shrugged. "Wasn't mine to tell." The front bell chimed again. Tina Alvarez entered in a navy work jacket, shaking off the last bits of drizzle. She glanced at the booth, then made her way over. "I figured I'd find you two here," she said, sliding into the seat next to Darlene. "Figured I might as well add my piece." Brandon gestured toward the jacket. "Be my guest." Tina folded her hands. 2 years ago, week before Christmas, a storm hit. Power went down at Mosswood. I couldn't get the maintenance crew until Monday. But Saturday morning, every headstone cleared, every path shoveled. Darlene smiled knowingly. "You're saying Hal?" "He even relit the entrance lanterns, on his own dime. I only found the receipt days later. He signed it H. Mercer Night Crew." Brandon stared at the patch again. He was right there the whole time, every day. He never left, Tina said. He just didn't need a spotlight. The radio behind the counter shifted tracks. A slow, wistful tune from the 1940s began to play, something swingy but subdued. The older customers recognized it instantly. Heads nodded, feet tapped gently. Brandon reached for the jacket. His hands moved carefully, as though lifting something fragile. He refolded the sleeves, brushed a few crumbs from the seat cushion, then stood. Across the room, a boy no older than 7 raised his hand and waved. Norman Jr. Grinning shyly, he wore a denim jacket with 2 American flag pins on the collar. Brandon blinked, then nodded once in return. He turned back to the table, held the jacket against his chest. "I need to find him." Milridge's library didn't have a computer database, but it had Maggie, and that was better. The door gave its usual squeal as Brandon stepped into the stone-trimmed building that smelled of old pages and floor wax. Warm air greeted him like a familiar quilt, though the afternoon sun outside had grown cold and bright, casting long diagonal shadows across the tile. He rubbed his hands together, still holding Hal's napkin in his coat pocket, like a pressed flower. Maggie sat behind the reference desk with a crossword half completed and a teacup that never left a stain. Her hair was pulled into a gray coil, and the pin on her lapel, a little bronze owl, looked older than the card catalog. "Well," she said without looking up. "Took you long enough." Brandon blinked. "Excuse me, I figured you'd be in by noon latest." Man leaves a coat and a riddle, someone's bound to want answers. He approached slowly. "How did you?" Darlene called. "Said your face had the look of someone trying to read Braille with gloves on." Brandon couldn't help a small laugh. "I'm looking for anything about Hal Mercer. Old articles, military records, anything." Maggie's smile was the kind only librarians wore, 1 part mischief, 2 parts satisfaction. "I was in school with his sister. Knew the family. Quiet folks. Too quiet sometimes." She stood slowly. "Come on. You won't find him on Google, but the truth's curled up in drawer 6B." She led him down a narrow corridor lined with faded posters from literacy campaigns past. In the archive room, dust floated in the shafts of winter light like bits of powdered sugar. Maggie powered up the microfiche reader and fed a reel with a practiced hand. Start around 72. Southeast Asia Operations Blackout Missions. Look for bylines from a reporter named Winslow. He was local, but he followed up on missing soldiers. Brandon scrolled through headlines, his eyes adjusting to the pale blue glow. It was slow work, quiet, rhythmic. Somewhere between page 47 and 53, he paused. Here, he said. Maggie leaned over. The headline read, 5 rescued from nightfall drop. Hero remains unnamed. Beneath it, a single paragraph. Survivors report an unidentified airman navigated an improvised evacuation under blackout conditions after the pilot was killed. The airman carried 2 wounded soldiers over 3 miles of uneven terrain before intercept. The man wore a patch, a triangle insignia not yet documented in formal inventory. Maggie whistled low. That's him, all right. Brandon leaned back. Why didn't anyone ever follow up? They did. But he never answered the door. Later that afternoon, Brandon found Hal's address listed under a post office box number. The house, a small rental off Chestnut Street, stood behind a sagging gate and a porch with no railing. The mailbox clattered emptily when he opened it. He knocked anyway. No answer. The curtains inside were drawn. He stepped back, unsure of what he'd expected, a man in uniform at the door. A fire glowing through the window. Looking for Hal, a voice called from next door. An older man with a thick coat and a cane leaned against the porch post, watching him over the top of rimless glasses. Yes. I'm Brandon. I work with the city. Thomas, the man said. I've known Hal since '64. He won't be back today. Brandon stepped closer. Do you know where he is, Mr.? Thomas tapped the end of his cane on the steps. Sunday, 3 p.m. Veterans' section. Cemetery up on Hillcrest. Rain or shine, that's where he'll be. Brandon swallowed. Every Sunday. Everyone I can remember. As he turned to go, Mr. Thomas added, He's not hiding, son. He just doesn't need to be found. Brandon nodded and walked back down the path, his breath curling ahead of him. Back at home, he sat at the kitchen table with a pencil and opened his calendar. He circled the coming Sunday with firm, deliberate strokes. He won't walk alone this time. At exactly 3:00 p.m., Hal was there, jacketless hands behind his back, eyes on the name he touched every year. Lieutenant Callahan's stone had grown smooth over the decades, the engraving softened by weather and memory. Hal stood motionless, the wind teasing at his shirt cuffs. The white flower in his right hand rested against his thigh. The cemetery around him was quiet, blanketed in gold leaves that spiraled slowly from the trees and gathered at the corners of headstones like prayers unspoken. Brandon approached without fanfare. His footsteps crunched gently along the path, but Hal didn't turn. When Brandon reached his side, he didn't speak. He stood, hands clasped in front, his own white flower cradled in his palm. They stood like that for a long time. Eventually, Hal placed his flower down at the base of the grave. Brandon did the same. The blooms leaned toward one another, white against the granite. Hal broke the silence. He was 23, had a laugh that cracked through static. His voice was rough but steady. Called me Cap, even though I was younger. Carried his photo in his helmet. I never asked who the woman was. Always meant to. Brandon waited. I come every year, Hal said. Because I can. He turned then just enough to see Brandon fully. "Why are you here?" Brandon answered simply. "Because I should have listened sooner." Hal didn't nod or frown, but he didn't walk away either. That evening, the high school auditorium was filled with the kind of restless energy only teenagers could generate. Rows of students shifted in plastic seats, programs fanned like playing cards. Teachers lined the back walls and parents dotted the aisles. A banner stretched across the stage, Career Day. Voices who serve. Hal stood off stage, arms folded. He wore a charcoal sweater, plain slacks, and no name tag. Brandon joined him, holding a folded letter. "You sure about this?" Brandon asked. Hal replied without hesitation. "One condition." Brandon smiled. No applause. Hal stepped to the podium. The murmurs quieted. He adjusted the mic once. "I was asked to talk about service," he began, voice clear, not loud. "Not all service is uniform. Sometimes it's doing the quiet job when no one's looking." He paused, let the stillness settle. "When I was 19, I carried a man 3 miles through jungle. He was shot, couldn't walk. Told me over and over, 'Don't stop. Keep walking.' I listened. Never forgot it." He looked out at the students, scanning faces young and unweathered. "You'll be told to speak up. Sometimes you should. Other times you'll need to shut up and carry." There was a hush, not from confusion, but understanding. Brandon stepped forward, unfolded the letter. "This is from General Torrance," he said. "The best heroes don't speak loudly. They listen. They notice what's needed and do it without asking for credit." Hal Mercer reminds us what service truly means. Near the back, a girl wiped her eyes. A boy in ROTC uniform sat straighter. A hand went up from the second row. A lanky student with glasses and a notebook asked, "What did the patch mean?" Hal looked at him for a moment, then said, "It meant I went where others wouldn't." The room held its breath. No one clapped. No one needed to. Later that week, Brandon returned to the library. Maggie met him at the door with a smile and a key. "North display case," she said. "Left shelf." Inside the glass, folded with care, lay Hal's jacket. The patch faced outward, now lit by a single overhead bulb. Beneath it, etched in brass, were just 3 words, he reminded us. At his side, Norman Jr. tugged at his father's sleeve. "Can I wear a jacket like his someday?" He never needed applause. And maybe that's what made his quiet presence ring louder than any speech ever could. What some called just a jacket became a reminder that dignity and sacrifice rarely wear signs around their necks. Kindness doesn't always announce itself, and worth isn't stitched in newness. Sometimes it's the worn things, the weathered faces, and the ones who stand in silence that carry the most weight. If this story stayed with you, maybe it's because you too have known someone who taught more by showing up than speaking out. And perhaps like Hal, we all have a chance each day to remind someone what quiet honor looks like.